They called me home saying my father was dying. No warning. Just a dozen missed calls and a voice on the other end, my mother's, sobbing so violently it barely sounded human. Then my sister grabbed the phone, choking out the words I'll never forget. "Dad's had a heart attack. You need to come now." I don't remember grabbing my bag. Don't remember canceling my meetings. Just that my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I booked the first flight out of Seattle. I hadn't spoken to my father in months. Things were always strained. But he was still my dad. The idea of not being there, of getting that call too late, felt unbearable. So I dropped everything. Work, clients, a major deal I'd spent a year building. Gone. By the time I landed back in upstate New York, it was just past 6 a.m. My cousin Theo was already waiting outside baggage claim. I hadn't seen him in years, but there he was, too cheerful for a guy whose uncle was supposedly dying. He gave me this weird half-hug, called me man, and asked about the flight like we were catching up over coffee. I cut him off and asked, "How's my dad?" He hesitated. "He's home, resting. Wasn't a full heart attack, just a scare." But his smile didn't reach his eyes. There was a flicker of something else there. Guilt? Nerves? It set something off in me. This voice in the back of my head whispering that something was wrong. But I was tired. I hadn't slept. I told myself I was being paranoid. When we pulled up to the house, my childhood home, I expected flashing lights, oxygen tanks, maybe even a nurse. Instead, the driveway was packed. Cars lined up like it was a family barbecue. And when I stepped through the front door, there they were. Everyone. My mom, my dad, my sister, Uncle Ray. Even a man in a cheap suit I didn't recognize, who I later found out was their lawyer. No one looked panicked. No one looked sad. And my father, the man I thought was dying, was sitting upright at the dining room table. Pale, maybe, but eating toast. When he saw me, he smirked and said, "Took you long enough." Something inside me cracked. I didn't say a word. Just stood there, stunned, as they launched into a speech that had clearly been rehearsed. They said it was about the family business, how Dad's health scare was a wake-up call, that they needed to restructure things, that I was the only one who hadn't over-leveraged my finances, that I could help by transferring certain assets into the family trust just temporarily, for tax protection, for legacy, for love. The lawyer slid a stack of papers across the table. "Routine," he said. "Standard protection." But one glance at those documents told me everything I needed to know. They weren't asking for help. They were trying to gut me. My condo in Manhattan, my investment portfolio, my equity in the tech firm I'd built from the ground up, all of it bundled into clever legal language that would transfer control to my father's company. If I signed, I'd lose everything. If they defaulted, which they would, I'd be left holding the bag. Ruined. This wasn't panic, it was precision. They knew I'd come, knew I'd care, knew I'd be vulnerable, and they had counted on that. Played it like a goddamn stage production. My mother, no longer crying, now playing the warm host. My sister cracking fake jokes and offering coffee. Uncle Ray chiming in like a mediator. And the lawyer? Just nodding at the right moments, pretending this was normal. It wasn't. This was a con, and I was the mark. The worst part? I saw it coming. I'd always been the outsider, the one who didn't fall in line. I left home at 19, built my life from scratch, while they clung to a sinking ship of a family business. And now they wanted my lifeboat. But they didn't know me as well as they thought. I picked up the pen, smiled, pretended to sign. My sister actually clapped her hands like we'd won something. Everyone exhaled. Then I slid the papers back across the table and said calmly, "These signatures are fake. You might want to double check before you file them." Dead silence. You could hear the furnace kick on in the next room. My mother's smile cracked. My sister's face turned scarlet. My father, he didn't look ashamed. He looked furious. Not because he was caught, but because I didn't play my part. I stood, grabbed my coat, and at the door, I turned back just once. "You used my love to try and rob me," I said. "Don't call me again unless someone's actually dying. And next time, get better actors." This was pathetic. Uncle Ray mumbled, "Wait, we can explain." But I didn't even look back. I walked out. And I slammed the door. I didn't go back to the hotel. I went straight to the bank. Because if they were desperate enough to fake a heart attack and stage a legal ambush, then I had no idea how deep this thing went. And if they were willing to try and steal everything I'd built with a smile on their faces, then this wasn't over. It was war. The next morning, I hadn't slept more than 3 hours. I couldn't stop replaying my father's expression when I told him the signature was fake. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't regret. It was rage. The kind of rage that doesn't come from being caught off guard, but from having a long, intricate plan fall apart in the final act. He hadn't just hoped I'd show up. He knew I would. He bet on it. They all did. And it had worked until it didn't. I ignored the flood of texts and voicemails already waiting on my phone. I didn't care what excuses they'd cooked up overnight. I needed answers. Real ones. So I went to the weakest link, my cousin Theo. He wasn't a schemer, he was a follower. A tag-along since we were kids. Never the one pulling strings, just nodding along because it was easier than thinking for himself. I found him waiting outside some hipster cafe near the edge of town, fumbling with his phone and pretending to look relaxed. When he saw me, the blood drained from his face. He tried to smile. I didn't. I didn't say anything. Just stared. Eventually, he cracked. And when he started talking, it poured out in one long, guilty confession. The family business hadn't just been struggling, it was hemorrhaging money. Years of bad deals, shady loans, and outright fraud. My father had invested in a warehouse development that never got built. Funneled cash through a shell company that vanished overnight. Got tangled with a silent partner who'd been bleeding them dry from the inside. But that wasn't even the worst part. They were being sued. A whistleblower, a former employee, had come forward with documents alleging tax fraud, falsified financials, and forged ledgers. The government was involved. The penalties, if proven, could bankrupt them, possibly even land someone in prison. That's why they needed my assets. Not to save the business, to shield themselves. They were trying to make me the legal cushion between them and the consequences of their crimes. I walked out of that cafe feeling hollow, like the house I grew up in had just been burned to the ground, and I was only now smelling the smoke. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about what they stood for, had been a lie. They didn't love me. Not really. They loved what I could do for them, what I could give, what they could take. I got in my rental car and drove to the only person I trusted. Maya, my corporate attorney. Sharp, unshakable, someone I'd built startups with, fought acquisitions alongside, negotiated multi-million-dollar deals. I told her everything. The fake heart attack, the ambush, the forged documents. She listened, quietly, then said 6 words that changed everything. If they use those papers, it's fraud. Real fraud. Criminal. She asked if I had a copy of what they tried to make me sign. I did. I'd taken pictures before I handed the pages back. She told me to stay quiet. Watch. Wait. 2 weeks later, I got the call. They used them, she said. Tried to secure a loan through a private lender using your signature. The lender flagged it, started digging. It's been reported. I didn't say anything. Just sat there, listening to the weight of it all land. It was over. Not the pain, not the mess, but the illusion. The game they thought they could play without consequence. I went back to the house one final time. No yelling, no confrontation, just clarity. They opened the door like they'd seen a ghost. I told them I knew everything. About the shell companies, about the fraud, about the lawsuit, about the forged papers, that an investigation had already begun and I had zero intention of protecting them. The only reason I wasn't pressing full charges myself was because I wanted peace, not revenge. Then I told them what would happen next. I was severing every tie, financial, legal, emotional. I'd updated my will, locked down every account, removed every beneficiary, changed every access point, and if I ever got another call from them, I'd go public with everything. My mother cried. My sister tried to reach for me. My father didn't move, just sat in his chair, staring at me like I was the one who'd broken something sacred. But I hadn't broken anything. I'd stopped carrying something that was already shattered. I left without another word, and I never looked back. Since then, my life's been quieter, not easier. There's grief in cutting ties with the people who raised you. It's a grief that shows up in quiet moments. On birthdays, holidays, in the smell of a certain dish or an old photo. But you learn to live with it. What I don't live with anymore is dread or guilt, or the exhausting weight of being responsible for people who would let you drown if it meant they could float a little longer. I still hear things, that the business went under, that the lawsuit is still crawling its way through court, that they lost the house, that my sister moved in with an old friend across town. None of it surprises me. You can only build on lies for so long before everything collapses. They thought I'd hold it up forever. But I'm done carrying things that were never mine to begin with. In the end, family isn't about blood. It's about respect, boundaries, love without a leash. And once you learn that, you stop chasing ghosts in houses that were never homes. If this story hit you like it hit me, like this video. Leave a comment. Let's talk about it. Subscribe for more gripping, narrated Reddit stories, true betrayal, raw emotion, and real-life awakenings. I post the kind of stories that stay with you, narratives that don't just entertain, they uncover. Join the community. You're not alone in what you've been through.